In this lecture, we're going to begin our discussion of budgeting. Budgeting is one of the most widely used tools across the globe. Small organizations to large corporations that are multinational, they all use budgeting. Governmental organizations and non-for-profits, they all use budgeting. All types of business managers and business functions all incorporate budgeting in their management decisions. Whether you're in marketing area or supply chain or operations, it doesn't matter. Whether you're a beginning manager or upper level manager, all levels of management are involved in the budgeting process. So it's very important that we get a good understanding of what budgeting is and look at some examples. Budgeting is involved in all types of management planning, directing, and controlling. So whatever type of management decision you're making, budgeting is involved in that. Now when we think about the benefits of budgeting, most of the time what I hear is that budgeting is important because it has to do with the money that's involved with the business. And well, that's true, but there's a lot more to it than that. There's a lot more benefits to budgeting. First of all, it forces managers to plan. You'll find as a manager that you are often involved in your day-to-day decisions and just trying to get through the challenges of the day. Budgeting forces managers to sit back and think about the future and what they plan to do. Another benefit of budgeting is it provides clear objectives and goals for managers and employees to try to meet. Budgeting also provides an early warning system. What I mean by that is, let's say you have a budget for your supplies of a certain amount. Well, if you've burned through half your budget within the first couple of months of the year, then that early warning system will let managers know they need to address that. Budgeting also is part of the coordinations of activity. So managers tend to focus on what their area of expertise is and not really think about what's going on in the other areas of the business. And so if you are in the budgeting process, you have to coordinate your business function, your area of expertise, with the other managers involved in your business. It also requires managers to be aware of the overall business instead of just being focused on their business function, like just focusing on customer service, for example. They have to think about what's going on with the rest of the organization in order to make their budget fit within the big scheme of things. Typically, managers prefer a participative budget. So with this type of budget, it requires kind of a grassroots effort from the employees and the lower level management all the way up to the higher level executives. And what that means is that instead of the executives, the CFO, for example, making a budget and passing it down, what usually will happen with a participative budget is that the lower managers will create what their budget needs are, and it'll flow up through the system until it gets to the upper level managers, who will then review it. This is a preferred system than just telling the managers what they need to do and just giving them the budget without having any input from them, because it really leads to more motivation. In other words, it means that the managers have kind of been part of the process, and when they're part of the process, they tend to be more motivated to make that budget work. They have what they call buy-in because they were part of it. Instead of it being told to them, they were allowed to be part of the creation process of the budget. One thing we need to be careful of is something called budgetary slack. And basically what that means is when managers create their budget, they put a little extra in there. And the reason they do it is because they worry that perhaps they'll run out of money, and they don't want that to occur, and they don't want to go over budget because that looks bad. And so by putting a little bit of slack in there, they hope to give them some wiggle room. But that's a very big problem. The potential problem with that is that if every manager does this in every area of the budget, then that little bit of extra slack can turn into a lot. And it really doesn't give us a very effective and efficient budget process. So all along the way, we want to be cognizant of the potential for budgetary slack and try to stop it as much as possible. Typically, budgets are made on an annual basis. A lot of times they start the budgeting process in October, November to be ready to roll out the budget in January, and the budget will go from January until December. That's a kind of a typical process that they use. There are something called rolling budgets, and what that means is they'll do a 12-month budget, and then they'll keep doing it every month. So they'll do January until December, and then in February they'll do February until January of the next year, and then in March they'll do March until February of the next year, and then they'll constantly be rolling out the budget. And what that does is it makes the budgeting process a little bit less cumbersome, because they're not doing 12 months. They're just updating and adding a month every time they do the budget. It also keeps the budgeting process at the forefront of their mind all the time. Whereas an annual budget, you might think of budgeting only when it comes to budget season, when it gets to around October or November. With a rolling budget, you're always kind of thinking about how the budget's going to be impacted each and every month. Both of these options are good. It just kind of depends on the management team and what they want to do. Annual budgets are much more common, but rolling budgets are starting to get more attention. In our lectures on budgeting, we're going to focus more on an annual type of budget or quarterly budget. We're not going to really look at rolling budgets, but keep in mind that those are up and coming. There is a difference between a budget and a strategic plan. Budget is usually done on an annual basis. Usually budgets aren't done for more than a 12-month time frame, and they're fairly specific as far as how much the spending is expected to be. A strategic plan is more of a long-term situation, like 5 to 10 years into the future, and it's a little bit more vague and general in nature. It doesn't look at specifics, it just looks at the direction that the company wants to go. If you try to do a budget for more than a year and do a budget for, say, 5 years, you're making estimates so far into the future that it would be very difficult for those estimates to be, very useful. So budgeting is more of an annual situation. A strategic plan is a long-term outlook. It's a little bit more general in nature. Let's look at a master budget. Now, one thing to understand is that a master budget is not in and of itself a budget. A master budget is really a bunch of smaller budgets put together. It's kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. Each of the smaller budgets are a piece of the puzzle, and they all give some information, but in order to get the big picture, you have to put it all together. And so the master budget is really not a single budget, but a bunch of the budgets put together, and they all start with the sales budget. Now, it's important to understand that the sales budget is the first budget. It has to be the first budget, because before you can determine where you want to spend your money, you need to know how much money you're going to bring in. So the sales budget is going to come from the marketing department. They're going to develop a sales budget. Then if you're a manufacturer, you're going to have a production budget. A production budget is only used for manufacturing. You wouldn't use this for a service business. So with the production budget, what you're doing is you're looking at how many units you want to manufacture based on the sales budget that was provided. So if your sales budget says that they think you'll sell 1,000 units, then the production budget is going to be used to make sure that you can meet that goal of selling 1,000 units. The sales budget has to come first. The production budget would have to come next. Before we can do the materials, labor, and overhead, we have to do the production budget, because you're not going to know how much direct materials to buy until you know how many products that you want to make. And in this example, we're going to use for our example company, potato chip manufacturer. So our potato chip manufacturing company needs to know how many potatoes they need to buy, and that would be their major direct material. But before they can determine how many potatoes to buy, they need to figure out how many cases of potato chips they're going to produce. So production budget would lead to the material budget. And the production budget also leads to the direct labor budget. They're going to need people to work at the factory to manufacture the potato chip cases. We're going to need to know how many cases of potato chips we're going to manufacture in order to know how much labor to have in the factory. So that's why production budget comes before direct labor budget. And then the manufacturing overhead budget includes your other areas such as the utilities in your factory, insurance, all those other things. After you get all of those together, then you go into the operating expenses. The operating expenses would be like your selling expenses, like your marketing, It would be your human resources. It would be supplies for your offices. It would be those types of general and administrative type expenses. You would want to do these after you've completed the production part of your budget so that you understand what's left over to go towards those. After that, you can create a budgeted income statement. So remember, the budgeted income statement, or any income statement, provides you with your profits for the period. So a budget income statement is going to say, well, based on the budgets that we have, this is our estimates for our profit for that period of time. All those budgets we just talked about are called the operating budgets because those are part of your day-to-day operations. Then we have the financial budgets. So the financial budgets include your capital investment budget, cash budget, and your balance sheet. The capital investment budget is your big ticket items. This would be where you buy new equipment or build a new plant or open a new factory. Then of course there's cash budgeting because income and profits aren't the same thing as cash. So it's important that we budget our cash so that we are aware if we're going to have any low points of cash so we can take care of that before the time comes and we get blindsided with that problem. And then finally we have the budgeted balance sheet. So the balance sheet tells you the kind of resources you have. In this case, because we're doing a budgeted balance sheet, these are expected resources. We call those assets, expected liabilities, and expected equity. So now we have an overview of the budgets. Let's go ahead and look at some of these.